Hello, future leaders of society. This is Miss O.
And Miss G.
And today we'll be continuing our exploration of different genres throughout literature. So far we've discussed 3 different genres. Those are romance, fantasy, and mystery. And today we will be covering the thriller genre. The short story we'll be focusing on is The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. There are many things that make this work part of the thriller genre, and Ms. G is going to summarize this work for you before we get into all of those things.
So in 1840, Edgar Allan Poe wrote a short story called The Black Cat. It pretty much was about a man who loved and cared for many animals with his beloved wife. Together they had a large black cat who was named Pluto. The narrator really loved this cat before his alcoholic problem, but then after he started drinking, he showed many hatred and a bunch of aggressive demeanor towards his cat.
Considering that Edgar Allan Poe was actually a cat lover, this story is kind of abrupt and gives a little bit of a weird vibe. According to one of the sites that we cite at the end of our presentation, Poe would occasionally write with his cat perched on his shoulder, and he loved his cat, and it's just a little bit spooky that he would write about a cat in such a terrifying and gruesome way. Also, another thing about Poe is that he is believed to never have signed anything with his full name. The name Allan came from his foster father, who he really didn't like so much, so Poe always signed E.A. Poe or Edgar Allan Poe. So why should we read this? What makes this story scary, and why does it belong in the thriller genre?
To begin with, we're going to talk about the introduction. In order to promote a mysterious and unpredictable environment, the narrator, usually in many of his stories, he writes whether he believes it or if he doesn't believe it. And here he writes, I neither expect or solicit belief. You can find that on page 223. And it often begins like that because it provides readers to see whether they want to believe the story that is being presented to them or not. So because his aggression was towards the cat, we're going to be talking about Pluto next. The violence was really gruesome. For example, the first example, one night the narrator came home intoxicated and got annoyed because the cat Pluto wasn't giving him any attention. And out of frustration, our character grabbed the cat, and in his defense, the cat bit him, and the narrator took a penknife out and quoted, cut one of his eyes from the cat's socket.
A tidbit of information is that the narrator in this story is never given a name. So that also contributes a little bit to the fact that the story is a little bit spooky and gruesome because we don't actually know the name of this man, which gives it an impersonal vibe.
Also, with that being said, after the narrator cut the cat's eyes out, he shows that he somewhat regretted or had remorse for his actions because he actually loved the cat.
Yet another thing that makes this story scary is after he removes Pluto's eye, his patience continues to thin with this poor animal. In a final violent rage, he ends up hanging the cat from a tree with a rope, and later that night, the narrator wakes up to his house on fire and frantically grabs his wife and runs outside and watches their house burn down in flames. After this horrific fire, the narrator notices that a group is gathered around the one standing wall that remains of their house, where the dead cat was thrown in through the window that he states was possibly used to wake him from his slumber. But it's just a little bit bizarre and creepy that this cat that he so viciously hung in a tree ended up being thrown into a house that was on fire. What does that say about the person that threw the cat in? And what does that say about the man who actually hung the cat in the first place?
So after that cat was somehow found dead, because as we mentioned before, both the narrator and his wife were animal lovers, the wife so happened to find another cat. This cat looked a lot like Pluto, but it did have a white patch on his chest. As they welcome the new cat into their home, the narrator becomes annoyed with the cat as well. He argues a lot with his wife back and forth. I guess a lot of it could have to do because of his alcoholic problem. The cat one day was following the narrator around as the wife and the husband were arguing, and the cat accidentally trips him, which infuriates the narrator, leading him to chase the cat around with an axe.
So, as scary as that is, and as much sense as that doesn't make, because the cat wasn't trying to trip the narrator, it was an accident, but his alcoholism contributes to these violent rages that the narrator is consumed by. Another fact about the cat that looks shockingly like Pluto is that the white spot on his chest is later said to look somewhat like the gallows, which is a form of execution during the time period, which is just another teeny tiny detail that Edgar Allan Poe added to this story that helps contribute to the shock factor. The fifth thing that we're going to talk about that makes this story scary is the body in the wall. After the narrator chases this cat around with an axe in an attempt to kill it and get rid of it for good, he accidentally ends up killing his wife instead of the cat. This rage is just so much worse than anything that the wife had seen before, and all of a sudden she gets hit in the head with this axe and then falls dead on the spot without a groan. And that quote can be found on page 228. Unfortunately, after killing his wife, the narrator decides that he needs to hide the body and places the body into the one standing wall of the house that was burned down and then covers it up with bricks, leaving it seemingly untouched. As the days pass, there are noises that come from this wall and possibly smells and things that attract people to it, and not only did he bury his wife in this wall, but the cat, who was still alive as well. So when the police came, all they heard was the yowling and screaming of the cat that was trapped in the wall with a dead body. If that's not creepy, I'm not sure what is.
So next we can talk about the 3 different themes that are involved in this. We have the first one, violence, the second one, drugs and alcohol, and the third one is changes and transformations. For violence, the narrator gouges at Pluto's eye after yanking him off the ground. He also hangs the cat from a tree. He shows both physical and verbal abuse to his wife, and he attempts to murder the new cat, but murders his wife instead.
That's honestly terrifying. Like, as a human being, anyone who shows that amount of violence should not have any sort of part in an animal's life, much less someone else's life, in my opinion.
Yes, that is really scary. So our next point is drugs and alcohol, a major factor in the change of characteristics of the narrator. This brings me to believe if the character never became an alcoholic, would he have shown as much as anger and aggression towards the cat? And was he only mean to the cat when he was intoxicated?
That would be a really cool assignment for us to do, is if we rewrote this story from the perspective of the narrator not having alcoholic tendencies and how he would end up treating his wife and the cat later on in the future without the use of alcohol and drugs.
So for changes and transformations, the narrator once held a compassionate and caring personality, but now he has turned cold and abused towards the things he used to care about. And he quoted on page 224, "I grew day by day, more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others."
That's honestly such a good quote. I feel like Poe really gets into your brain here and says, especially with the repetition of the more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others, it really gives you the imagery of stacking all of those feelings of violence on top of each other, which helps create that kind of suspicious feeling towards the narrator.
Even with the alcohol being involved, makes it even worse.
But is it a thriller? According to Writer's Digest, there are 10 basic requirements for a good thriller. Out of these 10, The Black Cat meets at least 6 of them. The Met requirements include having a good story. The plot of this story is not predictable and keeps the reader engaged. Although it's a relatively short story, it's a good read It's interesting all the way through. You can't tell what's going to happen. The first time I read this, I was genuinely shocked at the fact that he killed this poor cat in an attempt to kill his wife. Both crazy, bizarre things, but then he buried them both in the wall.
And when you think about it, if the cat was never in the wall, would he have found out for the murder of his wife?
That's crazy to me. The second thing is writing about the underdog. The caring aspect of the narrator, along with the helpless cat, creates a sympathy factor for the two of them. If the narrator had stayed in his caring and loving ways, this poor helpless cat and him would have had a really good, nice mutual relationship, but instead, it's not like that at all. He ends up changing his personality, which is another thing on this list, but the cat is the underdog in this tale. Assuming that the second cat is also a form of Pluto, the cat is the underdog and can be seen as the unseen hero because the narrator's abusive and aggressive tendencies really take charge in this story, but the cat is the one constant that fights back the whole time. Stating the protagonist's fears is another element that the black cat meets. The narrator forms a hatred for the cat, and his emotions are clearly conveyed to the audience. It is from the get-go, there are quotes upon quotes about how fed up he is with this cat. But towards the beginning, the quotes are soft, the wording is soft, he has a soft heart, he loves animals, he's nurturing and cares for his wife, as well as all of the animals they take care of, and I guess his biggest fear at the beginning would be to turn into this hard, abusive, aggressive person, and that's exactly what happens, which is another reason why this story is so scary. Another one is characters who changed. We just talked about this a little bit, but it really is a huge part of why this story is so shocking, because at the beginning you would never know that the alcohol and
180.
Yeah, he really does a whole complete change of personality traits, and you'd never know that all of these things would build up and create him into this tough, hard person who just really is so aggressive and detrimental to the people around him. The last element that the story meets is the use of a lesson. The lesson in the story can include consequences of alcoholism, which we've talked about a little bit, and the dangers of uncontrolled violence and abuse. If he had been able to control his actions a little bit better, instead of killing his wife or attempting to kill his wife, he wouldn't have killed the cat. If he hadn't gotten so fed up and hung the cat in the first place, maybe the second cat would have never shown up, and he would never have killed his wife.
So there's one thing that I did read online on the discussion board was how many people were saying that the cat is a reflection of how the narrator feels towards his wife. For example, it's like, what if the narrator saw the cat and its many aspects of how it shows as his wife? For example, what if how he says that he's getting annoyed by the cat day by day is actually trying to show that the wife is like nagging at him or bickering at him pretty much because of probably his alcoholism.
And the more he and his wife fight, the more fed up he gets with the cat. So I really can see how those two can go hand in hand. And it really shocks me at how much Poe was said to love cats, and he can write such a gruesome tale about a cat like this.
After reading this story, I looked at my cat and I was like, I don't know how a person could feel such hatred towards an innocent little animal.
Yes. Even if my animal does act up, I would never be that sort of aggressive towards my own animal, or any animal for that matter. So in your opinion, what is the biggest factor that makes it a thriller?
I honestly feel like it has a lot to do with the aggression the narrator shows. Because if you take the aggression out of it, is it really scary? Is it really horror?
Yeah.
I think the scariest part might be how he treats the cat instead of him killing his wife.
Yeah. For me, I think the scariest part is the fact that he absolutely did a complete 180 in terms of personality. For me, it's all about the relationships with people and the fact that his wife was married to this man that was soft and caring and loving, and then all of a sudden he becomes this aggressive and hatred, abusive, alcoholic man is such a scary thought for me, both as a woman and as a reader.